Well, these long summer evenings have been pretty good, haven't they? There is so much more that we can do and enjoy with these extended days. One of the things that Ros and I have enjoyed is sharing meals with others, enjoying the barbecue or at someone else's place, enjoying the food and refreshments and the company. And, you know, it's been great. But one of the things that people have been saying is that this is not a normal Taranaki summer. Am I going to be disappointed next year? Is that what I should be? Should I be bracing? Or is this kind of it? You know? Normally warmer. Excellent. If only the ocean was a bit warmer, that would be perfect. But anyway, in our series of Making Room, we're talking about increasing our margins in life, trying to reclaim some of those areas around our life so we don't feel that we are pressed too hard for too long. Last week it was make room for God and the idea of carving out just a little more room and knowing that we can create space for our lives for grace to happen. I hope that you were able to discover a little more room in your week last week, for a little more space, a little more capacity for where you might notice where God has been in your week. Today we're exploring the idea of making room for relationships. And that's what we want to focus on today, making room for relationships. See, at the heart of community is relationship. What that means is that I need you and you need me. It means that we need to know people and that they know us. But not just know about us, because we know about a lot of people, don't we? But the idea of people actually knowing us. Last week I mentioned that in the New Testament there is something like 59 commands that you need other people for to be able to respond. Love one another, forgive one another, encourage one another. It's hard to do Christian life on your own when all those commands are there, that we are meant to be engaged with others. Yet one of the challenges we face in a place like New Zealand and other established nations is that we can be quite independent at times, that we can provide for ourselves, that we can look after ourselves, that we can, take care of our own in our family. And sometimes as a church, we like the idea that we are the ones who help others. It's kind of what the church is about, helping others. And it can be very humbling and challenging when circumstances change and we need the help and support of others to do the things that we used to do for ourselves. But that's what community means. It means that, we can lean on one another. That when I'm strong, I can support you when you're not so strong, and when I'm not strong, that you can support me, and so forth. But it's not only about what happens within here, it's also what happens in our wider context as well. In our workplaces, in our school communities, in different ways. Because it's quite humbling to say to someone else, I need your help. I'm struggling. And yet that's the heart of community. Or if someone's not prepared to say it, that we might notice it. And being able to come alongside and go, how can I walk with you in this season? Last week we looked at a passage from 2 Kings 4, and we're actually using the same passage, and this is going to be the same next week as well. So you'll be very familiar with 2 Kings 4, starting at verse 8. And I'm sure most of you memorised it from last week, so it's not on the screen. But I'm just going to read verse 8 for you. It says, one day Elisha went from the town of Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. After that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. It's a great passage, isn't it? What happens here is that Elisha is travelling, and the woman from Shunem invites the prophet to her house. Now, the text says that she urged him, which is a little more than saying, hey, do you want to come over for a feed sometime? It's actually a lot more like, no, you need to come to my place. This needs to happen. This is what is going to happen today. You are coming to my place. She was insistent. Now, having people in your house for a meal or to stay is something that was part of the Jewish culture. As part of the Jews, it was a call to look after the foreigner and the stranger. And this all ties back to the time that they were in Egypt, because Egypt was not the homeland for the nation of Israel, for the Jews. And so they were oppressed, they were enslaved there. And when they came out of that, God gave them the command that they had to look after the foreigner, the stranger in their land, which actually meant not just, are you okay? But it actually meant you're coming to my place to stay tonight. If they saw someone out in the street and it was getting dark, that was the expectation. You would invite them into your house. You would look after them. And this was twofold. One, it was to remind them, one, that they have come from a place of oppression, where they were the stranger, where they never forget what it feels like to be, not to have a home, and to then be able to practice it. The other was, now that they were living in a blessed state, that they were to share that blessing. And not just go, aren't we awesome? But actually go, we're awesome so that other people can benefit. And we invite them in. We share the blessings that God has given to us. And that was the purpose of this idea of looking after the stranger. So it wasn't particularly uncommon to say to someone, hey, if you don't have somewhere to stay, come and stay at my place, come and have a meal. But probably what was uncommon was the insistence of this particular woman on this prophet. No, you're coming to my place. That could be a little confronting, wouldn't it? Imagine if you were out doing a bit of shopping at New Plymouth, someone walks up to you, do you know what? Tonight you're coming to stay at my place. But I've got something. No, you're coming to my place. You'd think, man, this person's a little left of centre, right? But this is what happened in this context. Let me ask you, when was the last time you had someone in your house who was a stranger? Not strange, because we've all got strange people in our house most of the time, right? But a stranger, someone you don't know. Now, it's not something we do very often. In fact, the art of hospitality for those that we don't know is being lost in our culture because we're becoming quite risk-averse, aren't we? We don't know the background of this person. We're not quite sure who they are and what happens if they come into their house. And we have all these sorts of things that go through our mind instead of just going, actually, we have resources to share. Who are the people who could benefit by coming and joining us? When I first moved to Australia, I'm grateful for Kit and Celia, who took a stranger who was a little strange into their own home. Well, I settled and found my place and found my feet. It was just a real blessing for me to be welcomed into their place and their wonderful hospitality. But did you notice what happens after the first meal that takes place, where this woman invites this prophet back to her home? They have a meal, but then it goes on to say, one day Elisha went to the town of Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. After that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. This was the beginning of something. The invitation to the meal wasn't a one-off. It's like, okay, I've done my bit, see you later. It became an ongoing relationship. Whenever he went back that way, he stopped for a meal. Now, sharing a meal with someone is significant, and there are amazing things that happen over a meal. Stories are told, blessings are shared, relationships are built, and bonds are strengthened. And I'm sure that many of you have a family dining table that could share many secrets of conversations, stories, laughter that was happened around the meal. When we look at the ministry of Jesus, there are a couple of things worth noting. See, it says when we talk about Jesus, it says Jesus came to, or the Son of Man came to. It has a couple of phrases that go with that often. One is Jesus came to save. In Luke 19:10 it says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. Another one is serve. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. And the next one is eating and drinking. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. I recently heard it described this way. Jesus' purpose was to serve and to save, and his strategy was sharing meals. Have you noticed how much time Jesus spent at meals? When you read through the Gospels, how often is Jesus reclining at the table, sharing a meal, eating? Someone said in the book of Luke, when you read about Jesus, he's either on his way to a meal, at a meal, or leaving a meal as you read through Luke. The first miracle happened as he was asked to help at a wedding feast when the wine ran out. And he was often at a meal reclining and teaching and engaging with others. Now, the reasons he's found in these places is partly cultural. If you read through the different festivals and that in the Jewish calendar, there was always a reason to celebrate. There was always a reason to gather, always a reason to have a meal. And so there was, lots of opportunities to do this, but it was part of the culture of the time. But Jesus also knew that sharing food with others was an important part of life and relationship. If we want to be like Jesus, we need to be willing to adopt this strategy. Could it be that sharing our faith starts with a meal? Could it be that serving each other starts with a meal? Could it be that simple? Sometimes we overcomplicate it. We have strategies and all sorts of ways, like how are we going to reach our community? What if we just stripped it all back and said the best way to reach our community is around the table, face to face? Acts 2:42, the birth of the early church, and we're told that there are 4 things that the early church committed themselves to. The first is the apostles' teaching. The second one is to fellowship, that sense of community. The third one was to prayer. And the fourth one was, I want to take a stab, sharing the common meal. It was part of what they did. They just shared a meal together. Now, I know North Point has a history of meals following the service. In fact, my first Sunday was followed by, now it takes me a little while to get my head around this, followed by a potluck crock pot meal thing, right? Kind of got it right. Should have had it up on the back screen so I could read it. But the idea of gathering around, sharing a meal, and I remember that. I remember some of the conversations that we had and some of the moments of engagement with the people that you don't always get when you do this thing and then you might have a cuppa and then you leave. But to hang around with a plate and to talk and to engage, I know North Point has a history of this. But we also know that sharing meals is a great way to build relationship. It's also a great way to share transmissible diseases, right? So that's why we're not doing that so much at the moment. We're kind of keeping that on the down low. Until one day when we can. And I'm hoping that day isn't too far away. We're able to share some of those things again. But there are a couple of things that happen around a meal. The first is that eating requires us to slow down. Well, it's meant to, right? How many of you have eaten a meal in the car? Yeah, that's right. The drive-through, eating on the run. I have, in fact, we have had family meals in the car. And, one of the things was that when we would travel, so when we lived in Brisbane and Roz's family were in Wollongong, that was just about an hour or so south of Sydney. So that was a 14-hour drive. Now, I did a little bit of research through the week, and Wellington to Whangarei, according to the Transport website, is about a 10.5-hour drive. Invercargill to Nelson is about 12.5 hours. So this was a pretty significant drive, and we did it a number of times, and there were a number of times when Roz and I did it on our own. But to be honest, I'm all about the destination, really. When they kind of go, it's about the journey. On those trips, it's not about the journey. It's about the destination. And so, we would drive through, get food, keep going. But I have to admit that once we started to have children, and it was a bad idea to sedate them, I was told, so we didn't do that. We had to change our strategy. Well, I had to change my strategy. We'd have to stop and pause and give time to play and do the things that kids like to do. Taught me patience along the way, I guess. How many of you have seen the movie Finding Nemo? I know I'm going back a few years. Finding Nemo. But do you remember the mantra that Bruce the shark had about fish? Fish are friends, not food, right? And one of the things in Western culture is that we see food as fuel, right? That's fuel to serve the body. It's there to sustain us, keep us moving. But if we simply see food as fuel, we'll just have a protein shake or a breakfast shake or something like that just to sort of get us through. Yet in other cultures where food is to be enjoyed, savoured, it's a place to linger. So it's not just about fuel. When it's just fuel, it means that you get it in as quick as you can. And some of us treat it like a Formula One pit stop. How much can I get? For how long? And then go on again. But that's not the way to approach meals. I have to admit that I'm guilty of this, that when we eat as a family, I am generally the first one finished. I blame it on being the youngest of 4 and having to make sure I got my share. But I need to remember that sharing the meal with the family and pausing and slowing down is an important part of life. When you have a nice meal, when you've taken the time to prepare something nice, you often enjoy it a bit more, don't you? You slow down, you savour the opportunity, and you enjoy the food. Sharing a meal takes time. Relationships take time. And when we try and rush them, we end up missing out. We skip past important elements of what it is. So sharing a meal is an important part of relationships. The second point is that when we share a meal, it connects us. When we share a meal, we share stories. We share life. We're connected together. It's a place where we can find out what's happening in people's lives, where we can really start to get below the surface, beyond the, how you going? Yeah, good, to what's actually happening under the surface. And as believers, we're called to share lives with others. One of the things that we are called to is we're called into community, not because of what we get from it, but because of what we add to it. Now, the reason that you're part of North Point isn't simply because of what you get. I hope that you do get some things. Maybe a small child along the way, I'm not sure. Would you like a hand? No? Great. But we're called into community not for what we get and what we receive, but for what we add. What do you contribute? How do you participate? Networking is an important business principle. I feel like I'm being upstaged at the moment, just quietly. But networking is an important business principle. You need to build those connections. You need to build relationships with other people, so that your business will, you'll find those connections. This came through really strongly to me one time when Ros and I were invited by her uncle, who was a significant person in Queensland Rail, and they were doing a thing with John Farnham. How many of you know John Farnham? All right. Yeah. So John Farnham's a singer, and what they did was that they did a tour. They put him on a train all the way from up north Queensland, far north Queensland, and they put him on a train and brought him all the way down to Brisbane, which is a very long trip. And he'd get off and play a few songs on each station. But at the end in Brisbane, there was a big concert, and we got invited along by Ros's uncle, and they were sort of tied in with Tourism Queensland. And so we're in this room, and there were a number of rooms, and what would happen is John Farnham will come through, be in the room for about 5 minutes, get a few happy snaps, and then carry on. But all the people in the room were part of, the tourism industry in Queensland. And I was a pastor. And so the conversation often went like this. Someone would come up to me, because they all work in the room, right? They come up to me and go, "Hi, how are you? What's your name?" Say, "Hi, Clayton. What do you do?" "I'm a pastor." "Great, nice to meet you." And they were gone as quick as they could. And I don't think it was because I was a pastor. I just think it was because I had nothing to offer them. They were there for networking. They were there to find the connections for their business, so that next time they wanted to do a tour up in far north Queensland, they knew someone who they could bring and go, "Oh, I've got this opportunity." But I was just a pastor. I didn't have any real network connections as far as tourism went. I've got some other connections, but not those ones. And so it came through really clearly that sometimes when we're in a relationship or we're in something for what we can get, it changes things, as opposed to when we're in a community for what we add. When we turn up knowing that I turn up not because I'm going to get something awesome, but I'm going to turn up because I know that I add something to this community. Maybe it's that conversation, maybe that's that opportunity. And one of the things that we need to remember is that if you're part of a community where everyone is turning up with that attitude of, "I'm turning up because I want to add something today," we all get blessed. We all end up receiving something. Because as we're listening to one another, as we're hearing stories, we come with a mindset of going, how can I add value to this conversation? How can I add value to what's happening on a Sunday? How can I add value to this person's life when, I notice that they're going through a hard time? And it changes the way we engage. It means that we don't leave, hopefully it means we don't leave Sunday grumbling about what we didn't get. But we actually reflect on how blessed it is to be part of a community where people are looking out for me, where I can share my story about how God has sustained me through leukemia, and people can celebrate that with us, where I can share my struggles and I know people will be praying for me, where I can share a common need and I know that someone else will turn up for me. Because that's what it is to be part of community. But being part of community means there has to be relationship. We don't just want to know about one another. I know a lot about lots of you, but I only know some of you because I've only been here for a little while. Hopefully that will change over time. And some of you know a lot about me because I share bits and pieces and stories and so forth. But there's only some of you who really know me, and that will change over time. And so these opportunities of how we get to know one another are really important. How we recognise that it's what we bring to the table is far more important than what we take from the table. In John 13:35 it says, "Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." It's only as we love one another, as we participate and contribute, that we will be that shining light to our community. Rose shared a great quote with me that she came across this week, and it was like, "When you finally learn that a person's behaviour has more to do with their internal struggle than it ever did with you, you learn grace." When we're a part of a faith community, not because of what it can do for us, but because of how we can add value, then we learn grace. We learn it's not about me, but it's actually about us. And that changes the conversation. It changes the way we are present to one another. In life today, there are a lot of virtual communities. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Not just the ones that I know of, and I know I'm well out of the loop. But so many ways that we have virtual community. We can see what's happening in other people's lives, but not connected to them. For those of us, we can basically see what's happening and just sort of keep it at arm's length. Or for those who engage, we can show the portion of our life that we want others to see. We can keep people at a distance. But if you sit at a table with someone, you know them better. You get a sense of who they are rather than just seeing their feed of what's happening around them. When we substitute real community for virtual community, we are the ones who miss out. See, sitting at a computer and eating isn't the same as sitting at a table and sharing life, is it? Now, I know that some of you, I've done this when I was coming over from Australia, we would have a family Zoom meal, which was good, but it's not the real thing, is it? And I know that some of you have done that as well. You've connected with family overseas, but you long for the time when you'll be together again. The screen does a portion, but it doesn't do the whole. You can't hug that person. You can't comfort them when they're upset. There are things that you miss out when it's all virtual. And COVID has created an opportunity where we've kind of had to sit in that space a little more than we would like. But we can't settle for that long term. We can't just go, well, this is the way it is. My hope in time is that we are connected to those family and dear ones that we are currently separated from because of COVID. So to make room for a relationship requires us to practice hospitality. And to practice hospitality takes time. We need to slow down, and we need to know that we start to build a connection with people as we share food and stories and kindness. They are the opportunities that develop as we take that. So does anyone want to have a guess at what the application from today might be? Food, sharing food, opening up our tables to others, taking the time to slow down, less meals in the car, more time at the table, and being present to one another. There's an old saying that I've come across that says it takes a long time to grow an old friend, and sometimes we want to speed that up, but we can't. We have to take our time. We have to share the adventure, the journey, the trials, the joys together. And sharing that around the table is a great place to begin. So I want to encourage you in this coming week, months, this year. What if we made this year the year of the table when we can? Because who knows what the year's actually going to look like. But what would it look like if you made a commitment to go, I want to have more people around my table this year. People I know, people I don't know. And see what happens. See what God might spark in that place. Let's pray together. Jesus, we want to thank you for the story that we have in Scripture. We thank you for the example that you said of spending time around meals. And Lord, we know that many of us practice hospitality. But Lord, I pray that you give us eyes to see and create new ways where we can engage with others, where we can invite others in, that we might remember what it's like sometimes not to have a full family around, that we might remember what it's like to share our blessings that we now receive. And so God, I pray that you would help us to notice the people on the fringe, notice those who we can invite in and share and enjoy. And some of those might lead to new lifelong friendships. Some of them might be seasonal. Some of them might just be meeting a need in the here and now. But we see this wonderful example of hospitality that you participated in, that you shared in. So God, help us to be a community where we do that. And part of the reason we do that is because we want to add value. We want to bring something to the table, not just be receivers. That we might participate in the work of your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, team.